an expensive proposition, Scott. Thank you.
$315 billion. That's one staggering cost estimate for Donald Trump's signature campaign promise.
The largest domestic deportation operation in American history.
More conservative estimates are still enormous. One group puts it at $162 billion. That's more than the government spent on most federal agencies in fiscal year 2024. We'll explain why an operation of this scale could require hundreds of billions of dollars over the course of a decade.
Is it your plan to deport everyone who is here illegally over the next 4 years?
Well, I think you have to do it, and it's a very tough thing to do.
That means roughly 13 million immigrants who entered the country illegally are at risk of deportation, about 4% of the U.S. population. To put that into perspective, the entire U.S. prison and jail population in 2022 was around 1.9 million people.
Scale is difficult for the government to carry out.
Aaron Reichlin-Melnick is a senior fellow at the American Immigration Council, a liberal immigration group.
Trump would have to do more than quadruple current ICE removals of people arrested in the interior just to hit the levels that we've seen previously under Obama.
I think that you take a sequential approach to it. You start with what's achievable. Let's start with 1 million.
The details of the plan are still being worked out, but let's say Trump does decide to deport 1 million people a year. That could still cost about $88 billion annually and take 11 years, according to one estimate. And that's assuming 20% of people would leave on their own.
Yes, it's expensive, but the trade-offs, I think, are well worth it.
Ron Vitello led the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency known as ICE for a year in Trump's first term.
Right now, the government is underfunded for its ability to detain people. To be able to accomplish this and the border mission simultaneously will require a reallocation, if not an infusion for resources.
Other immigration experts say,
yeah, it's unimaginably costly as well. I mean, I usually don't talk about how costly this is, both to the economy and also just like how costly it is to even fulfill this initiative, because I think it's insanely cruel, first and foremost. But it's crazy to me that, like, we always have money. We always have money for this type of shit. We just simply never have money to house homeless people. We never have money to make education free. You can't have, we can't fix the potholes. We can't improve infrastructure. We can't give you, better ISP service. We will never let you have public transit. Why? Because all the money has to go to our incredibly cruel, militant border policy.
Say the actual cost of Trump's mass deportation plan will be much lower than the American Immigration Council's estimate of $315 billion.
A more robust enforcement like the administration is contemplating may create significant economies of scale.
Stephen Camarata is the director of research at the Center for Immigration Studies, a group favoring immigration restrictions that helped staff Trump's first term.
Once you start doing it and you get an infrastructure in place, then it might be a lot cheaper.
Deportation starts with arrest.
There'll be targeted arrest. We'll know who we're going to arrest, where we're most likely to find them based on numerous investigative processes.
We're starting with the criminals, and we got to do it. And then we're starting with others.
Trump says dreamers, or people who entered the U.S. illegally as children, might be an exception. To make arrests, ICE officers would either identify someone who's already in a jail or prison, or go to a person's home.
Police, come to the door.
The majority of undocumented immigrants are not in law enforcement custody. Most of them have never committed any offenses.
Arresting people out in the community, known as at-large arrests, isn't a common tactic for ICE.
Trump greatly improved those numbers, for the record. That was one major difference between Donald Trump's immigration policy versus even Barack Obama's immigration policy. Barack Obama was the king of detentions or the king of deportations because he was doing border apprehensions. Okay. Donald Trump continued the border apprehensions, but more importantly than that, he went in and did dragnet He utilized ICE like a Gestapo force where he would just do at-large arrests, greatly releasing the shackles, the legal hurdles that ICE that kept ICE somewhat restrained. Seemingly, it's going to be worse this time around.
Pablo says it's more logistically complicated and more expensive, but it's at the center of the Trump administration's plan.
I'm not concerned that they won't be able to find them. It's just a matter of time, given the circumstances, given the availability of information, and given the resources in play.
At-large arrests often require multiple federal agents and take several days because ICE officers don't generally have warrants.
Immigration violations are not criminal, which means that a judicial warrant to arrest them would not have probable cause. They might have to wait hours for the person to leave their house. They might have to stake out a work site.
To carry out arrests at this scale, the American Immigration Council estimates ICE would need to hire over 30,000 new law enforcement agents and staff, making it the largest law enforcement agency in the federal government. Vitello says this number is overstated, and that state and local law enforcement could be directed via task forces to help with at-large arrests, something they...
What are you saying? If 4% of your country, what? Literally the only argument for mass migration is GDP growth. Y'all have been brainwashed by the elite into thinking that unlimited population growth is necessary. It's still cheaper than one payment to Israel amount. If 4% of your country are invaders, you have a fucking issue. You think that undocumented immigrants are invaders? Dude, I really despise right-wing fucking morons so much. Like, listen, you big dumb baby. You wouldn't have a single goddamn vegetable if it wasn't for the supposed migrant invasion, okay? Shut the fuck up. If it wasn't so unimaginably cruel and violent, I would be sitting here excited at the prospect for you to recognize what kind of economic collapse that you would experience when the price of a fucking tomato is $75. Speaking about invaders. I know that the chatter probably doesn't eat his vegetables. Okay, he eats chicken nuggets. Okay, what do you think is working at the poultry facilities? I feel like the left needs to refrain from using the word Nazi so flippantly. It lessens the meaning and impact of the word. So do you support the migrant slavery in Dubai? Do you think that it's the same process? Do you think that I'm not an advocate for processing all of the undocumented migrants? Don't try to fucking pull that shit on me. No, I understand the difference between an undocumented migrant and any other member of the working class that has the proper paperwork is that they are devoid of the proper paperwork. This is an unnecessary legal hurdle placed upon them so they can be continuously exploited. That exploitation also has a downward impact on overall wages for the rest of the working class. The solution to that is not to literally engage in Hitlerian-style concentration camps, detention facilities, dragnets, having hundreds of fucking undocumented laborers in court at the same time in order to expediently process them through the criminal justice system and place them in concentration camps with shitty fucking conditions as you try to actively deport them until you recognize that that is too costly of an endeavor and it's much easier to just like kill them if you don't fucking enslave them in these detention facilities. That is Hitlerian. That is exactly what Adolf Hitler did do, as a matter of fact. That is what he did. I am not in favor of involuntary servitude, slavery of any sort. If your economy relies on migrant slave labor, I think there might be some serious issues. Yeah, no shit. Welcome to 90% of my commentary. What the fuck? Yeah, the problem is you think that the 4% are invaders. You think, look at this. Are you telling me that 4% of the population are illegals? If 4% of your country are invaders, you have a fucking issue. You have an issue. You think these guys are invaders. There is no difference in the way they see the world and what they want out of the world than you. Yes, I do think that this endless profit seeking and endless cruelty and endless exploitation that the American economy relies on is unsustainable and also horrifyingly unjust. This is how it works. We destroy these countries. We also supercharge ecological disaster through man-made climate change, making agricultural work impossible in these countries. So then, of course, people go, all right, well, I have no other options. I need to survive. I'm going to go to America. They trek thousands of miles, oftentimes on foot, through treacherous conditions to come here so they can work for pennies on the dollar. This process is incredibly beneficial for capital owners, for the bosses. It's so funny hearing you talk about this stuff, but never mention factory farming. What? Maybe Americans being subjected to having to work in the disgusting conditions in our concentration camps we use for chicken nuggies will be a good thing. At any point in history, if hundreds of thousands of people entered your country without permission, that would have been considered an invasion. No. Brother. First and foremost, the idea that these guys are not entering the country with permission is silly. Okay? The permission structure quite literally is paperwork. Someone signing off on it. That's it. In order for this to be considered an invasion, you would have to think that every Guatemalan, Venezuelan, Mexican, every Honduran, every El Salvadoran is actually a monolithic force that is in the United States of America, not due to self-interest and the same exact fucking things that you need, okay? A roof over your head, food on your table, a better future for your children. But instead, they're here for some fuck shit. They're here to ruin the country. What an insane fucking attitude to have. Over 20 million people, by your estimations, that come from virtually every part of this world, every part of this globe. Yeah, they're all one note. They're all one-minded. They're all here to do invasion. They're all to do fucking fifth column style infiltration of the United States of America. What a fucking incredible invasion. White supremacists are so funny. They think white genocide is happening because people are voluntarily engaging in miscegenation. That's white genocide. Not the genocide that actual forces subject others to, other nations to, other ethnicities to. Okay? It's only genocide when people are voluntarily having sex with like a Latino guy instead of you. Then it's white genocide. It's an invasion, not when you have boots on the ground military warfare, but it's an invasion when people that were invaded or have had their fucking lives ruined due to American empire, due to Western imperialism, due to the global banking structure and debt traps that we have implemented in all of these fucking countries, due to the ecological disasters that they're facing and the lack of opportunity that they have, due to the fucking political instability that they face that we cause in their countries, then they escape those treacherous conditions to come and work here for pennies on the dollar, and that's an invasion. Oh, so now I'm a fucking white supremacist. Yes, you are. You are. If you consider undocumented immigrants to be invading this country, I'm sorry, you are a fucking white supremacist. Whether you recognize that or not doesn't change that reality. Okay? Yeah, you are an evil psychopath if you think that undocumented migrants are invading this country. That is 100% true. Okay? At most, you are deluded and stupid. Okay? In the most charitable interpretation, you are a stupid person who has been deluded into believing that these people, okay, that come from all different walks of life, all different political ideologies, that are coming into the United States of America for one purpose, which is to have a better life for themselves, are actually invading as a monolithic parasitic force. Okay? If you say that, then yeah, you're either a fucking dumbass who is repeating Fox News because that's what your grandpappy saw, that's what your pappy saw, and you're just basically repeating the same fucking racist, stupid sentiment, or you're just straight up a card-carrying fucking neo-Nazi. It's one or the other. Are you smart enough to be well-read enough into the fucking nerdy, esoteric neo-Nazi bullshit, and therefore a neo-Nazi? Or are you a dumbass who is just repeating whatever the fuck you heard from other people and are fearful and reacting in a fearful way? Okay? I've never watched Fox News in my life and don't consume. I don't care what your fucking personal background is. Your output is the same. This should cause you to really reconsider why you examine the situation with the lens that you're examining it. Instead of fucking reacting to me, try to reinterpret the subject matter. Try to look back and think, why do I think that, once again, 20 million people from all different walks of life, all different political ideologies that are coming from all around the fucking global south, why do I think that they are a monolithic force invading the country? You will find your answer there. Okay? That's it. I don't give a fuck if you've never watched Fox News. Why are you repeating Jared Taylor sentiments? That's what you should be asking yourself. If you've never watched Fox News, why the fuck do you sound like Tucker Carlson? Okay? It has nothing to do with their skin color. They could be blonde hair, blue eye Scandinavians. I still call them invaders. Oh, sure, chatter. I'm sure you would. And it doesn't even fucking matter. You'd still be a xenophobic piece of shit if the dynamic was so different that, like, we were actually dominating Scandinavian nations the same way that we've dominated the global south, and they were coming in here in droves. You would have the same fucking attitude towards them. You'd still be a xenophobic asshole, okay? It doesn't matter. You used to be a fascist in that regard. It doesn't have to be just like the fact that they're brown, okay? Once again, really reconsider why you sound exactly like fucking Tucker Carlson.
Already do.
Having that referral system, having state and locals help ICE officers do their job. Better to have it than not, but not definitive in whether they do the work or not.
Then there's detention, the most expensive part of the whole process. It costs around $200 a day to hold someone in ICE custody. Congress has provided enough funding for at least 41,500 detention beds in fiscal year 2025. But that's not nearly enough to detain 1 million people a year. According to the American Immigration Council, ICE would need to construct 216 soft-sided facilities every year for 11 years. Soft-sided facilities are temporary tent-like structures that have typically been used near the border. Anyone not physically detained would be placed on electronic surveillance, which costs approximately $4 per person per day. Private contractors involved in every stage of the detention process could drive up prices even more.
Contractors drive people in between ICE detention centers or drive the vans after somebody's arrested.
Detaining children would also make this process more expensive.
I don't want to be breaking up families, so the only way you don't break up the family is you keep them together and you have to send them all back.
Family detention is the most expensive kind of detention because the U.S. government is required to give people.
I don't really care about the economy that much. I just don't want to live in a country that looks like India. Yeah, I mean, this is like the peak racism take, okay? This is just like, is a peak racist take. I mean, he's a fucking neo-Nazi.
Minimum standards, and those children need to have child welfare professionals on site. They need to have pediatricians on site. There needs to be a provision for them to get schooling if they are going to be held for months or potentially years at a time.
Vitello says one way the government could reduce costs is by repurposing existing detention centers like Guantanamo Bay.
A third country like a Panama, potentially Mexico, could agree to hold third country nationals so that their due process could be adjudicated, thereby lowering the cost.
Bro, that's not racism. He just doesn't want our country to be invaded. Exactly, right? Right, chatter? That other chatter who was saying, like, what do you mean? It doesn't matter.
And kind of sending a message down the pipeline that people are not going to be released into the United States to await those adjudications. That alone will reduce the number of individuals trying to cross the border illegally.
Camerata says there are over 1 million immigrants who could be detained at a much lower cost.
There are people with a final order of removal that we just never made leave. Those individuals shouldn't have to be held long. We can get them out very quickly.
After detention comes legal processing, which immigration law experts say is the biggest bottleneck in the mass deportation process. An additional 10.6 million cases would require nearly 2,000 more immigration judges and over 1,100 more courtrooms.
I'm a mover, and one thing I can't stop thinking about is what happens to everyone who gets deported homes and possesses all the rights. What do you mean? It's exactly the same as Nazi Germany. It's up for grabs. It's free real estate. It's free cheap goods that you can just like buy from a secondary market in the exact same way that Zone of Interest addressed this. Yeah, you just do estate sales. It's something that already happens in the West Bank quite frequently, as a matter of fact. It's something that Israel does on a regular basis in both Gaza and also in the West Bank, and they did a little bit in Lebanon as well.
There is not only a cost in the immigration court side, but there's also a cost in the ICE side in getting these new prosecutors online. You need support staff for the judges, judicial law clerks, secretaries.
Staffing on both sides leads each case to cost over $2,500. To set up new courtrooms quickly, the government would likely construct tent courts, like those built in 2019 to implement the migrant protection protocols. This was when immigrants living in the U.S. illegally were returned to Mexico to wait for the duration of their court proceedings. They went to tent courts near the border to virtually appear in front of judges.
You could do those hearings much faster, logistically get more judges and more hearings heard in a day.
Yeah, we can't have judges that process claims for asylum seekers, but we can have judges to expediently deport. This is why I'm saying it's going to be El Salvadoran court style, you know, judge with a balaclava sitting in a fucking crowded court proceeding and doing dragnet allocations, just like, 200 at a time, boom, boom, boom. Fuck it, put an AI there, actually. Yeah, we'll have AI judges.
As with finding new efficiencies in the detention space, that is another thing that has its limits.
Tent-style courtrooms in Laredo, Texas, cost...
It's so funny to me when like people get mad at Israel on the Republican side, because there's plenty of people who like think what Israel's doing is like fucked up and also very costly. But then they like love this shit. So I guess it's just you don't want Jews doing it. I don't understand. Like, what is it? Like, I'm universally against this sort of fascist idea, okay? I don't care who's doing it. I don't care if it's America doing it. I don't care if it's Israel doing it. I'm against it, okay? You can't be on the one hand, that one chatter, remember, that one chatter who's not a Nazi, was very upset at how much money we're giving to Israel because Israel does this sort of shit, but then totally fine when we're doing it in the United States of America, calling them invaders. Well, what the fuck do you think Israel considers Palestinians? They call them invaders too.
Cost about $16 million to build and $143 million annually to operate. Once a person receives a final removal order, they have to either report for deportation at a later date or wait in detention until then.
At that point, the U.S. government has to actually arrange the removal. That would involve putting them on a bus and sending them to Mexico, but if they're from any other country other than Canada, that means putting them on a plane and flying them to their ultimate destination.
An operation of this scale could require...
I'll admit I've been getting brainwashed by right-wing groups, which is why I'm here to open my mind, but I would agree with deporting illegally entered criminals. Now, I do not agree with importing paperless people that do not commit crimes that cost that country. I also hate the idea of breaking up families, and it's disgusting. Please do call me a dumbass if my vision is flawed, but do tell why I'm flawed so I can become better. Yeah, the overwhelming majority of undocumented migrants are actually not doing any crimes other than crossing the border. That's it. Like, damn near the entirety. Undocumented immigrants are actually responsible for significantly less crime per capita than natural-born U.S. citizens are. Donald Trump has to lie about this over and over again. That's where racism comes in, where Donald Trump will say, undocumented migrants kill hundreds of thousands of Americans every year. Now, if I'm going to interpret what he's saying there in the most charitable fashion, okay, I will assume that he means fentanyl deaths, okay? Because if he doesn't mean fentanyl deaths, then he's out of his fucking mind. The real number of homicide and manslaughter committed by undocumented migrants on U.S. soil in the fiscal year of 2024 is like what, 29? It's not 100,000. 29. It's not 29,000. It's just 29. Okay. So maybe he means fentanyl, right? Maybe he means like, oh, these guys are trafficking fentanyl, and that's leading to, thousands of fentanyl deaths in the nation. Well, therein lies another problem. The overwhelming majority, if not the damn near entirety of fentanyl that are trafficked over the American border from our southern border and regular ports of entry, actually 90% of them are apprehended at regular ports of entry. Okay? They're coming in through the ports. Chemical compounds necessary to develop fentanyl are coming in through the fucking ports, oftentimes through China. The other direct introduction of fentanyl into the American marketplace is coming through regular ports of entry in cars that are not driven by undocumented migrants, not trafficked in through the knapsack of an otherwise law-abiding abuela coming in from Guatemala. It's actually coming with Americans who are driving their own cars and getting them chopped up in Mexico to deliver it into the United States of America. 90% of the fentanyl trafficked over the U.S. border is coming in through regular ports of entry. 90% of those who are arrested for trafficking fentanyl into the country are actually American citizens. Okay? This is why the notion, if the underlying notion of why we have to do these mass deportations as like endlessly costly, endlessly cruel, is because undocumented migrants are doing a shit ton of crimes, well then face the reality that they are not actually doing a shit ton of crimes. They're not doing any crimes at all, as a matter of fact. They're less likely to do crime than documented U.S. citizens are likely to do crime. Part of it is because they are fearful of law enforcement scrutiny. This makes a lot of sense. To be clear, I'm not American, so all my information has come through different sources that I've realized are flawed. Exactly why I'm here. Yeah, the information that I gave you is from both the Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Patrol, for the record, just so you understand. 81.9% were U.S. citizens for drugs in general, not just fent. Sorry, it's even higher for fent, but it's 81.9% of those who are apprehended for trafficking drugs in the U.S. are actually American citizens.
Require over 6,000 removal flights per year.
Can you explain to me why the same capitals who benefit from immigrant labor tend to be the same people who want to deport them and spread this fear? For a couple different reasons. One, because they don't think that their workers will get deported, which is a foolish assumption. But more importantly, the fact that you create this panic around undocumented migrants is exactly why you can keep them undocumented. That's it. And if you keep them undocumented, those capital owners benefit from hyper exploiting them. As long as they do not have the proper paperwork and legal recourse and can't vote, they are a permanent underclass that you can dominate. It is the very fact that undocumented labor force is kept undocumented that drives their wages and your wages down as a consequence.
For comparison, ICE had around 1,200 removal flights in fiscal year 2023. The average ICE removal flight costs about $17,000.
If you recognize their humanity, you would probably be more in favor of advocating to process them and document them. As long as you are fearful of them, fearful of the other, fearful that